Hi everybody, how you doing?
Great. How about you?
How am I doing? Oh. All right. So I do have a speech. Sorry if I'm a little bit long-winded. Us title holders can absolutely get that way. And unlike last year, I decided to go first so that she could be meaner than I am. Whenever I sat down to write this speech, I realized that I had options. I could do the traditional thank yous. I could do the reflections of the past year. And since we're continuing on as the 2026 Master Slave, I could have done the "in the next year we will" speech. All those would have been perfectly fine. But when I really reflected, a few moments stood out. Moments that made me look back on my journey and the conversations with younger leather people this past year. Moments that made me realize something that my generation and those before me have failed at. And then one of you elder motherfuckers called me an elder. And I had a minor life crisis with a "fuck, I haven't done shit." Imposter syndrome can be a bitch. However, since this is a leather bar, since this is a leather title, and since this room is full of leather people, I want to talk about some leather shit. I'm at an age where men start obsessing over history. You've seen the TikTok trend. Yes, I am one of those men who think about the Roman Empire every day.
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
But I also happen to think about leather history. And the way that I see it, leather, like this room, is generational. We're built up of different eras of people coming together with our commonalities. Most folks only talk about the old guard. But when we ask when the old guard was, we get answers like AIDS, Stonewall, before the 90s. I'm sorry, but that's about 40 to 60 years. That's not one generation, that is many. A generation is shaped by shared events, mentality, culture, and shared trauma, and leather has a ton of all of that. I personally believe that there's around 5 to 6 generations of leather, defined by not when you were born, but when you entered the leather scene. The first would be the founders. It's the first thing that we're taught in this life. Men returning from war, who happen to be gay, seeking the camaraderie and the freedom, and pushing away from the effeminate gay stereotype, emulate the motorcycle clubs, and form their own groups. Leather was about sex. It was about partying, it was about freedom, and it was about chosen family. However, this generation and era ends with Stonewall and the LA bar raids, specifically the Black Cat. This ushers in who I would actually refer to as the real old guard. Because this is when leather becomes political. It's still mostly gay men, but lesbians and dyke are coming in. This is the time of Drummer, the first IML, dykes on bikes. And leather becomes national, a little bit more organized. And this is the time when our bars start manifesting. But this era sadly ends with the AIDS crisis. I would refer to this generation as the lost generation because it almost all was lost. Over 300,000 people died of AIDS in 15 years. And if you were leather, you were 6 times more likely to get it. Entire lineages vanished. Stories that will never be heard are gone. Just like that. This was a time of funerals, a time of legacy leather, and surviving under a government that absolutely ignored us. This era ends with the politics of the 90s, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, the Defense Against Marriage Act, massive marches, and a push towards assimilation so as not to offend polite society. This brings in who I would call the revisionists or the educators. Either one fits them very well. This is where the old guard mythos actually grows, where it takes root. This is where the "I'm old guard trained" tends to come from. But education also explodes. NLA actually becomes a national organization. Many of our conferences focus on education began in this era as well. SPLF to name one of them. Leather and BDSM reaching mainstream media with movies like The Secretary.
Yeah.
And we start to actually win fights. Prop 8. Hate crime protection signed in by Obama. And more visibility. And this is the only generation that happens to end on a hopeful note. Because then it brings in my generation, or as I would call us, the Midgard. Now, that sounds Norse and kind of cool, but honestly, it's because we were kind of mid, honestly. Especially since we did not start doing anything until midway through our entry. Everything already existed. The books were already written, the classes existed, the conference existed, the leaders were already in place. And we were truly the millennials of leather. Promised everything and given fucking nothing. We did enjoy our wins though. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy being repealed. Yes, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy being repealed. S&M by Rihanna hitting number 1 on the charts. Marriage equality in 2015. And trans visibility skyrocketing. Caitlyn Jenner, Orange is the New Black, non-binary showing up in Drag Race, which I think people still love to this day. But we also started to see the fracture lines form. We've all heard the arguments of New Guard versus Old Guard. It started in this era. TNG, the next generation, a group that came kind of out of nowhere, filled with my people, start showing up to events, and then everybody's wondering, how do we get them to come? Switches become a thing. That wasn't a thing before. Brats become a thing. Vet life explodes in social media in general. It takes off like crazy. Now, this also is the time when the older generation start pulling back. Those of the lost generation that survived and the real old guard start pulling back as well, and the revisionists and educators start taking their place, and yet they seem satisfied with the status quo. We're happy with the nostalgia of, hey, we've made it. We also start seeing that gay men start drifting away from the larger leather community. If you remember at the time, for those that were here, Guy Baldwin had a speech in Houston that was almost more prophetic than it was the reason for this happening, but it pretty much showed us that they were going to pull away from the community before they ever did. But then COVID hit, and the new generation is here. This is the first generation, I feel, that of gay men who largely do not know their leather history. I'm standing in an eagle right now. Maybe 1 or 2 people who have entered since COVID know where that name comes from. Maybe 1 or 2 people know of Tom of Finland, or at least his art. It's literally right there on that door back there. But do you know his story? And probably hardly any of you know about the Satyrs, or that pride is an acronym and what it stands for. STD cases are also on the rise. Everyone's on PrEP for HIV, which is fantastic, but partying and playing and overdoses are also on the rise in our community. Play is getting more dangerous because somehow we've stopped teaching it. Consent somehow has become gray again. I'm not sure how that would happen, but I hear more and more about it. Transphobia, vaginophobia, that's creeping into our gay spaces. Don't believe me? Just look at the past fights here in this community. Grizzly Pines, Bear Roundup, those are just the past year. I have watched my slave in this very bar be dismissed because they're not men. Attacks on our spaces are also increasing. This bar alone has closed multiple times this year because of attacks. In Austin, the blueberry of the cherry pie. And just yesterday, Arlington Pride suspended their event because the city council voted against an ordinance that would have restored the city's anti-discrimination protections, ending Texas's largest private. At a game element this past year, when we presented on master-slave relationships, it was the first time many in that room had ever heard of master-slave. And that really threw me for a loop, because I remember at SPLF learning about MS from gay men. And now entire rooms don't know what that even is. It feels to me that we're losing this fight, but it's not because the enemy's stronger, they're not. We're losing because we're divided, and history seems to be repeating itself. Tell me if you've heard this story before. Young gay men, after coming out of a worldwide crisis, start gathering together for freedom, camaraderie, the sex, partying, and play. While attacks are on the rise, while politics ignore us or refuse to acknowledge us. Makes me wonder when the raids will start. What will the new AIDS be, and how many will we lose this time? And what bar will be our rally cry after Stonewall? It's dark, I know. But listen, every generation before us survived not because they were perfect, but because when the moment came, they chose each other regardless of gender, regardless of age or sexuality. They remembered the fight wasn't done. And they remembered that freedom is not inherited, it's maintained. So to the next generation, I'm asking you, not as a title holder, not as a quote-unquote elder, fuck you, TC, but as a man who loves this community enough to worry, what will you do with your generation? To my generation and those before, leather has never been saved by one age group, one identity, or one era. It survived because we looked around and realized no one's fucking coming, so we'll stand the hell up. We don't have to agree on a lot of things. We don't have to worship the same history. We just have to choose to be leather with each other, not against each other. So will you continue the fight?
Yes.
If the founders could do it in hiding, if the old guard could do it while they were being hunted, if the lost generation could do it while they were dying, and if the revisionists and educators could do it while they were building, and if my generation could do it while we scream into the fucking void, then I know the next generation can too. Leather is generational, and generations aren't something that we talk about, they're something that we become. So let me ask everyone, what will you do with your generation? What will you be remembered for? And to quote many a title holder before me, if not you, then who? If not now, then when? Thank you.